You hear New York and your brain probably goes straight to Times Square, Wall Street bonuses, and rent prices that don't even sound real. But that's only one version of the story. Drive a few hours north, and everything shifts. The factories are gone, the paychecks are smaller, and somehow everything still costs the same. In 2026, over 1.7 million adults and nearly 500,000 kids across New York are living below the poverty line. And when the pandemic support ran out, child poverty didn't ease back up slowly. It snapped right back past 20%. That means thousands of people are working full-time, doing everything right, and still coming up short at the end of the month. So in this video, we're breaking down the top 10 poorest cities in New York State. If you want more videos like this, hit subscribe. Let's get into it. Number 10. Newburgh. Coming in at number 10 is Newburgh, sitting right in Orange County. According to the latest numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau, this place has a poverty rate of 24.3%. The median household income here is just $34,858 a year. Let's be real, trying to stretch 34 grand in New York State is basically an extreme sport. How do you even make that work? With rent for a basic two-bedroom apartment pushing way past what a minimum wage worker takes home, the math just doesn't add up. Think about trying to pay gas, electric, and buy groceries on less than 3 grand a month before taxes. You fill up your gas tank to get to work, buy some basic groceries for the week, and suddenly half your check is gone by Tuesday. This is where things fall apart. But Newburgh has some pretty wild history when it comes to how this country treats poor folks. Back in 1961, the city manager at the time, this guy named Joseph McDowell Mitchell, decided to wage a literal war on welfare. He sent the cops to interrogate people getting assistance and tried to force folks to do hard labor just to get their relief checks. Crazy to think about, right? That single local event up in New York basically kick-started the whole modern stereotype of the welfare queen across the entire country. Today, the state actually classifies the town as facing moderate environmental stress. That's just a polite government way of saying the city heavily relies on state and federal aid just to keep the streetlights on and the trash picked up. And it's not because people aren't trying. A lot of folks here with a population of around 28,000 are clocking in every single day. But when the jobs available are mostly low-paying service gigs, climbing out of that hole feels like running on a treadmill. Families are feeling the squeeze every time they hit the checkout line at the local grocery store. Eggs and bread cost the same here as they do in wealthier towns, but the paychecks are just a fraction of the size. When a quarter of the town is living under the poverty line, the local economy just stalls out. Small businesses struggle to stay open because nobody has extra cash to spend on a Friday night pizza. So you get this setup where the city can't pull in enough tax revenue to fix the potholes or fund the schools. What happens to the families stuck in the middle of all this? They just get pushed right to the absolute edge. Number 9. Troy. At number 9, we've got Troy. This city sits right next to Albany, and it's been dealing with the exact same hangover from the old industrial days drying up. The overall poverty rate in Troy is 23.4%. But here's the part nobody talks about. A recent report from the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy shows Troy has a child poverty rate of 41%. Think about that for a second. Almost half the kids growing up in this city are doing it below the poverty line. That puts a wild amount of pressure on the local school system and food pantries. Teachers are ending up acting like social workers, buying winter coats and snacks for students out of their own pockets just so the kids can focus in class. Why is it so hard to get ahead here? Well, almost 33% of the folks living in poverty in Troy don't have a high school diploma. In today's world, try getting a job that actually pays the rent without a high school degree or fancy technical skills. It's practically impossible. You're essentially stuck competing for entry-level minimum wage jobs that don't even cover the basics. A gallon of gas hits your wallet hard when you're only making $15 an hour. With a population hovering around 50,000, Troy is trying really hard to reinvent itself. They've got some cool historic buildings and a nice downtown vibe going on right now. But behind the scenes, everyday families are getting priced out of basic survival. The median income is just shy of $34,000. Imagine trying to pay rent, keep the heat on during a brutal upstate winter, and feed your kids on that kind of money. Winter heating bills up there can easily wipe out a whole week's pay. People are just exhausted. They end up relying on state assistance not because they want to, but because the local job market just doesn't offer a realistic way out. When you don't have the education to grab those few good-paying tech or healthcare jobs, you get trapped. Can you really blame people for needing food stamps when the math is this broken? It keeps a third of the poorest residents permanently stuck at the bottom of the wage ladder. And frankly, it's pretty hard to watch. Number 8. Schenectady. Number 8 on our list is Schenectady. This place used to be an absolute powerhouse back in the day, mostly thanks to General Electric. It was the kind of city where you could graduate high school, walk right into the plant, and secure a solid middle-class life for your family. Well, those days are long gone. Back then, GE employed tens of thousands of locals. Now, folks are fighting over part-time hours at retail chains. The money just dried up, and it left a huge mark on the working class here. Today, the city has a poverty rate of 21.2%. But there's something really unique about how poverty works in Schenectady. It's incredibly concentrated. Data pulled by the Schenectady Community Action Program points out that an overwhelming 76.9% of all the people living in poverty in the entire county are packed directly inside the city limits. So while the suburbs might be doing okay, the core of the city is acting like a huge magnet for economic struggle. Schenectady has about 67,000 residents, and when you pack that much poverty into a tight space, it creates some intense pressure. The median income is right around the low 40s, but that doesn't paint the full picture for the folks at the bottom. When almost 4 out of 5 poor people in the county are living on the same few blocks, you get stuck in this one zip code and just can't get out. The grocery stores leave, the infrastructure gets old, and the local businesses board up. You've got families working hard, doing everything right, but they're still pulling up to food pantries just to get by. Does that sound like a fair deal to you? It's your classic Rust Belt story. When the big factory leaves town, it takes the good wages with it. What's left behind is a service economy that expects people to survive on absolute table scraps. How do you build savings when your whole paycheck goes straight to the landlord in the grocery store? And with child poverty hovering around 30% here, the next generation is inheriting a really messy financial situation. Number 7. Jamestown. Number 7 takes us down to Chautauqua County, to the city of Jamestown. The old manufacturing base here is completely gone. Right now, Jamestown is staring down a poverty rate of 25.3%. And the median household income is a really tough $28,267. That's crazy low for anywhere in New York, even out west. But Jamestown is the perfect example of something experts call the working poor illusion. You might think everyone is just sitting around doing nothing, right? Nope. According to Data Commons, the overall unemployment rate here is actually sitting at a pretty normal 6.1%. People are out there working. They're clocking in, doing their shifts, and paying taxes. Yet, a full 33% of all kids under 18 inches Jamestown are still living below the poverty line. That tells you something really scary about the economy right now. The purchasing power of a regular entry-level wage has just totally crashed. If you make $15 an hour, your paycheck is basically gone the second it hits your bank account. You can grind away for 40 hours a week and still not make enough money to put food on the table for your kids. Jamestown has roughly 28,000 residents, and the pressure on everyday families is off the charts. When you're pulling in 28 grand a year, one broken-down car or one medical emergency can literally wipe you out. Who has an extra $500 lying around for a new alternator? Folks here aren't relying on food stamps because they're lazy. They're doing it because the math of survival just doesn't add up anymore. When a full-time paycheck can't cover basic rent and groceries, the system is clearly broken. It's a terrifying reality for the parents trying to raise that 33% of kids in poverty. Are we really cool with full-time workers needing government handouts just to eat? They're playing by the rules, but the rules don't pay enough to live. Number 6. Utica. At number 6, we've got Utica. The poverty rate here sits at 27.5%, which is more than double the national average. Within the city limits, the median income is barely scraping past 30 grand a year. Utica has a population of around 65,000 people, and it's been struggling for a long time to figure out its next economic move. But Utica brings up a totally different side effect of being broke that we don't talk about enough. It's not just about paying the rent. It's about your health. Based on health data compiled by Census Reporter, 42.3% of Utica's population is dealing with clinical obesity. And no, it's not just because people love junk food. It's a huge public health crisis that ties directly into urban food deserts. When you're poor and relying on SNAP benefits, fresh vegetables and high-quality proteins are usually way out of your budget. Try feeding a family of 4 with corner store prices. A gallon of milk or a loaf of bread costs way more there than at a big supermarket. Families are forced to buy cheap, highly processed, subsidized food just to make sure they have enough calories to get through the week. It's survival mode eating. When the only grocery option in your neighborhood is a corner store selling chips and canned soup, it really messes with your health. How do you eat healthy on a dollar menu budget? So now you've got a city where folks aren't just stressed about money, they're physically sick from the environment they live in. Healthcare costs pile up, which drains whatever little money families have left. How do you pay for medicine when you can barely afford rent? You just can't win. A lot of folks in Utica are doing their best, working the service jobs available to them. But when you're making 30 grand a year and your health is failing because you can't afford a proper grocery haul, it's a really rough deal. The pressure on the local hospitals and community clinics is huge. And wouldn't you know it, it all stems right back to that 27% poverty rate. Number 5, Niagara Falls. Number 5 is Niagara Falls. This one always shocks people. It's a globally recognized tourist spot, right? Millions of people show up every year, snap their pictures, and spend a ton of money. But step just a few blocks away from the water and things get super grim. The residents actually living in Niagara Falls are really struggling to get by. The total poverty rate here is 25.1%, and the child poverty rate is scraping right up against 40%. You might think that getting a basic education is the ticket out of this mess. But the data from Niagara Falls says otherwise. A recent brief from the New York State Community Action Association revealed a huge 44.4% of all the residents living in poverty here actually have a high school diploma. They went to class, they graduated, they did what they were supposed to do. But in this tourist-driven service economy, a high school degree just isn't an effective shield against poverty anymore. Working the cash register at a souvenir shop or cleaning hotel rooms doesn't pay a living wage. Tourists are dropping hundreds of dollars on fancy dinners overlooking the falls, while the guy cooking their food takes the bus back to a neighborhood that's falling apart. The city has around 48,000 residents, and the gap between the tourist money and the local wealth is crazy. You've got massive revenue coming into the parks, but the families living down the street can't afford their heating bills. It's super frustrating for the locals. They see the wealth flowing through their city every single day, but they can't touch it. And with median incomes hovering under 50 grand, raising kids here means constantly making tough choices between paying for gas or buying groceries. What do you do when your paycheck is gone by Tuesday? It proves that the whole stay-in-school advice doesn't mean much when the only jobs hiring are paying minimum wage. Do we honestly expect people to build a future making beds at a hotel? Number 4, Binghamton. At number 4, we're looking at Binghamton. This city used to be a major hub, boosted by huge employers like IBM and old shoe factories. But those companies packed up and left a long time ago, and Binghamton just emptied out. Today, the overall poverty rate is a nasty 31.7%. And the child poverty rate is even worse, sitting at 42%. Binghamton has a population of about 47,000, and trying to make a living here is incredibly painful. But Binghamton holds a much sadder title in New York State. According to the Feeding America Map the Meal Gap Project, Binghamton actually ranks #1 overall in the entire state for food insecurity. A wild 22.9% of the people here don't have reliable access to food. That beats out way bigger, historically poor cities like New York City, Rochester, and Buffalo. Think about how crazy that is. Almost a quarter of the city doesn't know where their next decent meal is coming from. You've got food pantries dealing with lines that wrap around the block. Families are literally skipping meals so their kids can eat. It's a level of everyday stress that most people can't even comprehend. When the main worry in your life is whether you can afford dinner on a Tuesday night, you're not exactly thinking about long-term savings or climbing the corporate ladder. When all the good factory jobs left, they were replaced by low-wage retail and service gigs. So you have parents working full shifts, getting their paychecks, and immediately realizing it's not enough to cover both rent and food. They have to make a choice, and usually, the food budget takes the hit. How long can someone live like that before they just break? It's tough for a city that used to pride itself on innovation and manufacturing. Now, the biggest struggle isn't building computers, it's just trying to keep the fridge stocked until the next payday. Does that sound like the American dream to you? Number 3. Buffalo. Entering the top 3 is Buffalo. Buffalo is a pretty big city, with over 270,000 people living there. But the poverty numbers are really tough to look at. The total poverty rate is 23%. Even worse, the NYS Office of the State Comptroller reported Buffalo currently ranks 7th in the whole country for the worst child poverty among large American cities. 30% of the kids here are growing up broke. And the government red tape these families deal with is insane. In just 1 year, Erie County processed over 2,500 family assistance case closings. It's a super unstable system. You miss one piece of mail and boom, your benefits are gone. People are totally exposed. Recently, when the federal government was threatening a shutdown, EBT food benefits got delayed. You know what happened next? Predatory scammers immediately started targeting desperate Buffalo residents with fake text messages, trying to steal their EBT PIN numbers right when they were most vulnerable. It's sick stuff. And let's not forget, Buffalo winters are famous. Heating bills out there are no joke. So when you're poor in Buffalo, you're also freezing. How do you keep your kids warm when the gas bill is higher than your rent? But it's not all bad news in Buffalo. People in the community are actually stepping up and fighting back outside of the traditional welfare system. There's a new initiative called the People's Fund that recently launched. They're literally handing out a guaranteed $500 a month to residents in the poorest zip codes with zero strings attached. They prioritized folks who already had their electricity shut off. It's a direct cash lifeline that completely bypasses all that slow, punishing government paperwork. And honestly, for families who are constantly stressing about keeping the lights on, that $500 is life-changing. It proves that sometimes the best way to help people isn't to make them fill out 100 forms, but just to give them the cash they need to survive. Wouldn't you agree that direct cash beats endless bureaucracy? Number 2, Rochester. Number 2 on our list is Rochester. This city used to be the home of Eastman Kodak, and when that company faded, it basically took the entire local middle class down with it. Today, Rochester is dealing with a 29.1% poverty rate. It also ranks 5th in the nation among all large U.S. cities for the worst child poverty. With over 210,000 residents, the scale of the struggle here is pretty wild. But here's the thing you need to know. The welfare dependency in Rochester isn't because people are lazy. State data explicitly shows that hundreds of families on assistance here are actively working jobs. We're talking about full-time pre-K teachers and farm workers who still have to rely on SNAP just to feed their teenage kids. They pay taxes, they play by the rules, but they still have to eat, right? Things got so bad here that when the pandemic eviction bans ended, local outreach groups told WROC News they saw a 53% spike in families forced to literally live in their cars. In 1 year, they found 47 kids experiencing raw, unsheltered street homelessness. But here's the part that will really make your blood boil. Monroe County recently spent $14 million responding to almost 7,000 Child Protective Services investigations. And guess what? 76% of those cases were completely unfounded. People were basically calling the cops on families just for being poor. Imagine being a parent, already stressed out about money, and then you have a state worker knocking on your door because someone thought you were a bad mom just for being broke. How is that fair to anybody? So the state is dropping tens of millions of dollars to investigate and traumatize poor parents, instead of just using that exact same money to help pay their rent or buy them groceries. It's a totally backward setup that punishes people for struggling. Don't you think that money would be better spent keeping families off the streets? Number 1. Syracuse. And finally, the poorest city in New York State right now is Syracuse. Syracuse has an overall poverty rate of 26%, which is rough. But the real reason it's sitting at number 1 is the kids. Syracuse ranks second in the entire United States for child poverty among large cities at a crazy 46%. Almost half of the kids in a city of 140,000 people are living in poverty. The poverty pipeline in Syracuse is basically a machine that funnels people straight onto the streets. According to a recent report by the Syracuse City Auditor, 45% of all the homeless folks in Syracuse ended up there directly because of a legal eviction suit. In a recent court count, judges ruled in favor of landlords over 400 times simply because of default evictions. That means the tenants didn't even show up to court. Why? Because they either don't understand the complex legal system or they literally can't afford to take a day off from their hourly minimum wage job to sit in a courtroom. It's a brutal trap. You can't skip work because you'll get fired, but if you don't go to housing court, you lose your apartment. So they go to work, miss their court date, and come home to find out they're homeless. It's incredibly messed up. Across the state, over 30% of households are technically employed, but just can't afford the basic survival budget for a family of 4. The reality of upstate New York proves that being on welfare isn't some luxurious cheat code. For millions of hardworking people, it's a desperate lifeline in a state where wages simply don't cover the cost of staying alive anymore. How do you dig yourself out when the system keeps throwing dirt back in? People are out there grinding every day, but the math is just broken. And until something changes, cities like Syracuse are going to keep seeing those crazy high poverty numbers. Thanks for hanging out, and let's hope things start looking up for the Rust Belt.